South Carolina greatly exceeded expectations in their first 2 years under Shane Beamer, but they took a pretty big step back last year, largely due in part to injuries. So now the million-dollar question is, will the Gamecocks bounce back in 2024? So welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, guys, ready to break down the South Carolina Gamecocks, their schedule and record for this upcoming season. As always, please continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos, and of course, check out everything down in the description below. That includes our website, thegridironexpert.com, home to our exclusive expert picks, some of the best spread picks in the entire country for one of the lowest prices in the entire country. We want you to take advantage of those, guys. We guarantee you'll win big with us. We're beating out over 80% of the national handicappers each of the last 6 years, and we're going to make it 7 by the end of this year. So go check it out. The links to all those things down in the description below where you can become a member of our GE Nation. So South Carolina, guys, I got to give a lot of credit to Shane Beamer. I love him. He's one of my favorite coaches in the SEC. And I was really happy to see the success he had those first few years. And a lot of people thought South Carolina was in for a solid year in 2023. And injuries are what plagued them. We'll just go ahead and jump right into it. It was mainly the offensive line, right? That's what was the death of South Carolina. Last year, the Gamecocks had a different offensive line combination for their first 9 games of the season. At one point, 12 of their 20 offensive linemen were injured. 5 of them lost for the entire year. They gave up 41 sacks and only averaged 85 rushing yards per game. You can't run the ball if you don't have guys blocking for you. So it was a horrendous offense, especially up front for the Gamecocks, and really that was beyond their control. Injuries for everybody out of their control, and it's really unfortunate when that happens for any team. But this year, we don't expect 12 offensive linemen to go down. We don't expect the Gamecocks to have to deal with that many injuries up front again. They have a lot more potential on the offense. Lonorris Sellers, a lot of potential. Big-time dual-threat QB, 6'3", 240 pounds, dangerous runner, good arm, a lot of potential for the South Carolina offense. They add Rocket Sanders in from Arkansas, rusher over 2,200 yards during his time with the Razorbacks. One of the best running backs in the SEC these last few years when he was healthy. They do lose their top 3 pass catchers, and they lose Antoine Wells, who was injured for most of last year, not even included in the top 3 pass catchers from last season. But they do add 6 transfers in to help bulk up that pass-catching core. Nick Harbor does return as well. We expect him to play a bigger role this season. South Carolina's got the talent on offense, and the offensive line should do a much better part, not just because of their health, but also because they have a dual-threat quarterback to prevent as many sacks from happening. Defensively, 8 starters are back this season. 6 of their top 7 tacklers from last season return, led by Debo Williams, 113 tackles last year. Jalen Kilgore, DQ Smith, Nick Emanwari, TJ Sanders returns on the defensive line, 4.5 sacks last year, led the team. This is a defense that should, in theory, take a pretty big step forward, should be relatively strong. But here's the thing with South Carolina, right? They went 5-7 last year, just missed out on a bowl game. A lot of people do point fingers at the offensive line. That was a major concern. It was a major issue. The defense was a major reason they lost a lot of games too. Now, they got banged up from time to time on that side of the ball, but they lost 7 games last year. They allowed over 400 yards in 5 of those 7 losses. They lost by 14 to North Carolina, 10 to Georgia. Yes, I know they led at halftime, but still. 21 to Tennessee, 22 to Missouri, 13 to Texas A&M, 9 to Clemson. They lost every game by at least 2 possessions except for that 2-point loss to Florida. Really only gave up 2 sacks, by the way, so you really can't blame the offensive line for that loss. So it's easy to point fingers and say, oh, we would have been so much better if the offensive line had been good, but you also got to say, hey, the defense didn't do their job either. The last few years, South Carolina has had one of the most difficult schedules in the country. Shane Beamer exceeded those expectations, got them to bowl games in 2 of those 3 years he's been there. It was an amazing job. Once again, now the Gamecocks face one of the most difficult schedules in the country. Can they overcome that and get to a bowl game? That's the million-dollar question. You take a look at the schedule. It's tough. I think they open up with a win against Old Dominion, drop the next 2 games against Kentucky and LSU, just like that. And actually throw the game on against Akron in there as well, so 2-2 right for the bye week, because Akron's a surefire win. Kentucky and LSU, right? On the road in Lexington. Yes, they beat Kentucky 17-14 last year. Yes, they won 24-14 back in 2022. But the Wildcats are a dangerous team this year. Very dangerous. Brock Vandegrift transferring in at quarterback from Georgia. Got a very good, underrated wide receiver core for the Wildcats. But what I'm more impressed with is the Kentucky defense that returns 10 starters and only gave up 113 rushing yards per game. You're going to force a young quarterback in Lonorris Sellers to come into Lexington, which under Mark Stoops hasn't been the easiest of place to play, not like it was prior to his tenure there. Going to make his young quarterback come in the second week of the season and try to win this game with a relatively new core of pass catchers against this strong Kentucky defense. I just don't like their odds, even though they have won against the Wildcats the last few years. So give me Kentucky to win that game, and then I'm not convinced South Carolina's to the point where they can beat LSU, even with the game being in Columbia. This is their first home game against the Tigers since 2008. That's hard to believe. That's absolutely ridiculous. 16 years since we've seen LSU come to Columbia. That's that SEC cross-division for you. But they have never beaten LSU in SEC play. 0-7 in the series. LSU is still going to be very dangerous offensively. Garrett Nussmeier, the real deal at quarterback, and their issue last year was their secondary defensively. That's going to improve drastically. The front seven for LSU, though, is great. Defensive line, linebacking core, really, really good. And if this offensive line for South Carolina hasn't gelled yet, I'm afraid they're going to be in for a bit of a trouble against this LSU front seven. So give me the Tigers, who do have a better offense right now than South Carolina, who I think defensively takes that step forward. Brian Kelly's squad gets the job done and obviously beats Akron. So 2-2 heading into the bye week. Not the most ideal start. You'd love to be 3-1 here. But again, I think the most winnable game there is the road game at Kentucky, and I really like the Wildcats way more in that game. Coming out of the bye week, the schedule gets tough. There are 3 more games prior to their next bye week. 2 on the road against Alabama and Oklahoma. The other one at home against Ole Miss, who's probably going to be a top 10 team at this point because the Rebels have a very favorable schedule to kick off their season as well. I think South Carolina loses all 3 of those games. Go ahead, sue me, roast me, whatever you want to do. You cannot tell me that you think the Gamecocks will beat Alabama or Oklahoma on the road. That's not going to happen. They will probably be double-digit underdogs in those games. So the most winnable game here is against a top 10 team, more than likely in Ole Miss. An Ole Miss team that is a veteran team that has loaded up through the transfer portal. Lane Kiffin, the portal king, a veteran quarterback in Jackson Dart. Antoine Juice Wells, the star South Carolina wide receiver, now plays for Ole Miss. The offense will be one of the best in the country. The defense is severely underrated, and they returned 10 starters on that side of the ball. Yes, Ole Miss needs to work on their rushing defense. They gave up over 150 rushing yards per game last year, so Lenore Sellers could have himself a day. Rocket Sanders has had great success in recent years at Arkansas against Ole Miss. Wouldn't be surprised to see them put up a lot of rushing yards here, but ultimately that Ole Miss offense is going to be the one that makes the most plays, gets the job done. They can overcome the road environment. They're not beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa. First trip in Tuscaloosa since 2009. Again, SEC cross division for you. And then on the road to Oklahoma, the Shane Beamer Bowl. Remember, Beamer was the assistant or associate head coach at Oklahoma from 2018 to 2020. So a little bit of a reunion there for him. Kind of a homecoming for him in a way. South Carolina, this is their first game in the state of Oklahoma since 1948 when they played Tulsa. So interesting reunion for Beamer. Interesting game for the program as a whole. Oklahoma's first year in the SEC. But the Sooners, very, very good offensively. Jackson Arnold shows some promise in the bowl game. Still needs some work, but has some promise. The skill positions for Oklahoma, very, very good. And the defense for the Sooners is going to be one of the best in the SEC this year. They will bottle up this South Carolina offense and get the win. They will be double-digit underdogs in all 3 of those games in between bye weeks. And then they come into the month of November, and that's where they're going to have to go on a tear. Got 5 games, got to win 4 to go bowling. It's not impossible. It's not. Very winnable games here. Very winnable games. We'll start with Texas A&M. Is that a winnable game? Yes, it is. Winnable. In fact, I think they actually do win it. I think they beat the Aggies here. And here's the thing. They're going to beat one of those big-time home games, right? They're going to beat... I don't think they're good enough to beat LSU. I don't think they're good enough to beat Ole Miss. I think their most likely big-time home win is going to come against A&M or Missouri. I lean more towards the Aggies right now. An A&M team dealing with a new head coach, dealing with new coordinators, dealing with new schemes. I think they have the ability to surprise this year. And yes, I know South Carolina hasn't had much success against the Aggies in SEC play. They were 1-9 against Texas A&M in SEC play. But you're getting the Aggies at home, on homecoming, off a week of rest, with your backs against the wall. We saw what South Carolina did towards the end of the season last year. They started to figure things out, kind of got hot, and fell just short. They were in a win-or-go-home game against Clemson, and they only lost by 9. So they had that opportunity. They got hot in the month of November. Hot, if you want to call it that. Their backs against the wall. They've got to take care of business. I think they get it done against A&M, who does have a few questions in the secondary especially. I am interested to see how this A&M defense thrives under a defensive-minded coach in Mike Elko, but I think they will go through a handful of growing pains. Conversely, I look at Connor Weigman and say, hey, can he handle this South Carolina secondary? Can he come in to a crazy Williams-Brice Stadium and beat South Carolina and Columbia? I'm going to say no. I don't think they're able to get the job done. I think the South Carolina defense delivers in this game. They get the win. They beat Vanderbilt. Back-to-back wins. Got 4 now. And then that home game against Missouri. That's a winnable game. That's a winnable game. And it could be the one that determines whether or not they go bowling or not. Really could be. Because they're going to beat Wofford. There's going to be 5 wins there. But can they beat Missouri? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say they can't. They have struggled against the Tigers as of late. They have been held to 15 points per game and 259 yards per game in the last 5 meetings against the Tigers. And they've lost all 5 of those meetings against Missouri. They lost 34-12 last year, held to 286 yards of offense, and the Tigers are loaded on the offensive side of the ball this year. Veteran quarterback and Brady Cook, some great transfer running backs, a great wide receiver core, and a defense that was very strong last year, loses a handful of key starters, but not as much as you think. Going to be very, very good on that side of the ball again this year. They've owned this series. I'm not going to pick against the Tigers right now until I can see South Carolina put up a better fight against them. The Tigers are college football playoff contenders, guys. And once again, I can see South Carolina being a 8, 9, maybe even 10-point underdog to the Missouri, assuming the Tigers are living up to their expectations. So based on what we have seen over these last couple of years, I do think they fall to the Tigers. They beat Wofford, and they lose to Clemson. Another win or go home game, just like we saw last year. Win in Death Valley, you go bowling, lose, and you stay home at 5-7. And I just don't think they can get it done. I like this Clemson team a lot. My preseason pick to win the ACC. I think they take that next step offensively after being kind of disappointing on that side of the ball last year. They will have one of the best defenses, not just in the ACC, but in the conference again this year. They hang with them. They only lost 16-7 to the Tigers last year. They make it respectable. They leave everything on the line, everything left out there. But the difference is South Carolina might just be fighting for a bowl spot here. Clemson might be fighting for a college football playoff spot here. And they've got home field advantage in Death Valley. Yes, I know they lost there last time. I don't think they allow that to happen again. Dabo Swinney will not let it happen again. And with that being said, South Carolina, we have going 5-7 in 2024. And yes, I know that's ridiculous for some. If you look at the schedule, if you're trying to find a way to get them to that 6th win, Kentucky maybe could be there. Missouri maybe could be there, but they are not beating LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, or Oklahoma. I just don't see that happening. I don't see any of those happening. Even with 2 of those at home, I do believe LSU and Ole Miss are significantly better. LSU, especially with that game being early on in the year, South Carolina is trying to figure things out. Just don't see that happening. That's life in the SEC. If you're trying to get to that 6th win, Kentucky, Missouri, and probably Clemson. And that's a bit of a stretch too. I just don't see it happening. I don't see it in the cards. Shane Beamer worked some miracles those first 2 years. I'm not putting it past him to do the same again this year. But South Carolina's issues that were much deeper than the offensive line. That was the main issue last year. And that will be a main thing that gets corrected this year because we don't think they're going to have as many injuries. But it was way more than just the offensive line last year that played the Gamecocks, that prevented them from reaching their goals. And that will once again be the case again this year. The Gamecocks are competitive. They do not go down without a fight. They are very, very close to the postseason, but to me, fall just short once again. 5-7 for Shane Beamer's squad. Would love to see him get there, but just don't see it. So guys, as always, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos. Check out everything down in the description below. Leave your thoughts about this video. I'm sure we'll have some great ones down in the comments below. Also, check out our website, thegridironexpert.com, home of our expert picks. Some of the best spread picks in the entire country, being at over 80% of the national handicappers each of the last 6 years. So if you want to win big with us, if you want to become a member of our GE Nation, go sign up for those today before the season starts and check out everything again down in the description below to become a member of our GE Nation. And once again, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.